Hi everyone, Teddy Baldassarre here, and I am back with Joe Kirk of Grand Seiko, now developing a new tradition here at Washes and Wonders of our sit-downs, of going through all things Grand Seiko.
Like, why not? I mean, it was a lot of fun last year. I think that we're going to have a lot of fun this year, too.
We have some great things on the table. So,
cool, yeah.
I'm going to follow your lead.
Sure.
Where do we want to begin? We have a lot of great things, and I would just say that we're going to save some great things for the end of this video. We have some great things at the beginning of this video, but you're going to stick around for the entire show here. So,
Yeah,
but I'll follow your lead. I'll follow your lead.
You know, we always want to kind of go out with a bang, right?
I like that idea.
Yeah, for sure. All right, so what we're going to start with, we have very recognizable design. In our sport collection, we have the Spring Drive GMT triple time zone. So sapphire crystal bezel. You have bidirectional rotation that is all. Basically, anything in white is Lumibright, our proprietary luminous paint. So glows like crazy. On the chapter ring, you have your other 24-hour scale and then 12-hour clock. So there's your 3 time zones. This one we're doing in green, inspired by the Hotaka mountain range surrounding our Shinshu watch studio. So this model, we're going to be looking at a July delivery roughly, and it's about 6,200. But it's a great part of the collection. This design's actually been in Grand Seiko pretty much starting around 2006, 2007.
Yeah, very familiar.
Yeah, it's you know, it was really like the first GMT spring drive in Grand Seiko, the original design, and you know, it's been a huge part of our collection ever since. So some of the like subtle differences from the original way back when, you know, the sapphire bezel has always been a part of it, but typically only the numerals were lume. So now we have the bicolor bezel, and on top of that, the kind of day-night indicator. And I know a lot of people ask, like, why is it not split down the middle? You know, so that's like half and half,
okay, yeah,
right?
Yeah.
And we do that for the legibility of the numerals.
So you don't want to cut off the numeral because that would,
exactly
contrasting. Got it.
Exactly. So you know, all Grand Seikos have to be extremely easy to read. That's a part of one of the pillars of the brand, right? One of the brand values, let's say.
Wonderful.
So,
Wonderful.
yeah, very exciting piece, but this also has our Iwao pattern. So it's a very familiar pattern because it's in like the Shunbun with the pink dial, right? Everyone I think knows that at this point.
Yes.
It's the same base pattern, and I love telling people about the patterns, and like I always get the question, like, how are they made? No, it's a very long and complicated process. Everyone thinks that, you know, there's this elaborate story, you know, behind it, but really it's most of our you know, textured dials are made by press pattern. So you're applying a couple 100 tons of pressure to the metal dial base. But what's cool about this is the mold to create the pattern is carved by hand.
Yeah, so that's where you're getting that hand finished element with that process. So that's how you're able to make it.
Yeah, and it's always consistent, right? You don't have to worry about the texture being different from one to the next.
That's great. Wonderful.
So, yeah.
Moving right along.
So next, and I'm like really excited to see this design finally introduced as a mainstay in the Grand Seiko lineup. So back in 2019, we introduced what we were internally calling the Tokyo Lion, and it's one of my favorite designs because it's really bold and aggressive for Grand Seiko.
The case and the angles on this case, they are prominent, loud, and they make a statement.
Yeah, but one of the best parts is that, you know, it's so flat with such wide surfaces and so many angular planes intersecting with each other that our Zaratsu polishers probably hate the designers for this because it's incredibly difficult to create this case, and especially Zaratsu polish. So, you know, I think this is one of the reasons why we haven't seen this a core part of the lineup yet, because, you know, we did it in 2019. We had 2 titanium limited editions. We also introduced the Godzilla, which was based on this same design. Very popular, one of my favorites, of course. And then 2 rose gold models, and that's been it for, you know, this entire time. So we introduced recently a chronograph version as a continuous part of the lineup, and now we have the 3-hand power reserve spring drive. It's high intensity titanium case, has a sapphire bezel, but it's fixed, not going to rotate. Okay. And then lume used for obviously all the hands markers, and then the numerals on the bezel. The pattern on this one we call lion's mane. So it's a little bit different than the Iwao pattern you see on the green dial. Similar in terms of the texture, but completely different mold, completely different pattern, and it is exclusive to this design. So, but it's made the same way that they make the Iwao, so gotta love that.
It's beautiful.
Yeah.
Moving right along, this is probably one of the sleeper favorites of for myself for the show.
I want one.
I would too. So this is the SLGA019. Did I get
Correct.
it?
Yeah, you guessed it perfect. Maybe you didn't have to guess.
Well, I didn't have to
Maybe you
guess.
just
This dial just entranced me enough where I could remember.
All right. So, one of these days you'll have to go to our Shinshu watch studio in central
You don't have
Japan.
to twist my arm, please.
Yeah, okay. Done. So this is one of the most prominent things, aside from the mountain range that surrounds our Shinshu watch studio, one of the things I'll always remember my first time going is seeing this massive lake, Lake Suwa. And so Lake Suwa is a big part of our DNA as a brand. The factory used to be called Suwa Seikosha, right? So Lake Suwa is a very important part of Grand Seiko's history. And we wanted to emulate Lake Suwa in a watch. We originally did it as a limited edition and later introduced the first dial in our Evolution 9 collection, SLGA021, which was announced a month or two ago. And stainless steel, very dark blue dial, a little difficult to see the pattern, but you get it in the light and it dances, right?
Yeah, that rippled pattern to show the moving waves.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So this one we're doing in high intensity titanium. So different case material, different bracelet material, obviously, but also the dial pattern's a little lighter in color. And for this one, going to be continuous production also. So we'll have steel or titanium as options with slightly different dial colors, but obviously both blue. For the dial pattern, one of the things I love about it is instead of carving the mold, they hammer it.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So that's
hand-hammered
a different
mold.
process to create that molding.
Correct, yeah. And one of the things I love the most probably about this dial is it really shimmers like the water surface. It's incredible.
So it's kind of making these small little crack and etches into the style to allow that to happen.
Yeah, so the lake surface called Minamo in Japanese is the inspiration behind this.
9RA2 on the inside, so spring drive here.
Yeah, spring drive, 5-day power reserve, and it's actually thinner than our regular 3-day spring drive. Spring drive 9R65 caliber is the closest. So another added benefit, the power reserve indicator is on the oscillating weights bridge, as opposed to on the dial, and I know a lot of people like that feature.
Yeah, it's a point of whether you love it or hate it. I mean, it's a defining characteristic of Grand Seiko. And I think there's those that love. Of course, there's those that like it on the dial, because I feel like once you take it off the dial, I see complaints like, every brand has a defining characteristic about them, and you have to figure out what it is. And some people love them, some people maybe don't. But I think it looks wonderful, and this is one of the stars of the show. Another one. So we're seeing extension into the dive watch family.
Yes.
So last year we saw a new diver.
Of course.
Now we're moving
Evolution
into
9 diver, right? We got the sports models lined up in Evolution 9, and the diver was probably one of the most popular. It was inspired by the Kuroshio Current in Japan, which flows along. It flows north on the east coast of the island, and so this year we're introducing a blue interpretation inspired by the Ushio Current, which is flowing south and kind of intersects with the Kuroshio Current. So different concept a little bit, but same dial pattern, and just instead we're doing it in blue. And I will say that the blue certainly pops and the texture is a lot more prominent compared to the black dial.
much easier to detect under the light.
Oh yeah,
without
for sure.
question.
Yeah,
and the
it's a matter
history
of
of
subtlety, right? What do you prefer?
and the history of blue with dive watches with Grand Seiko is not as established. I mean, there's one of the rare instances where you're using blue in a dive watch.
Yes, and in terms of like the history of blue dive watches in Grand Seiko, yes, there's not many, but especially for the bezel. So we're doing the zirconia ceramic bezel, which I think I explained in last year's video that it was a long time before Grand Seiko would accept ceramic as the bezel insert material because it does have the potential to break. But thanks to a new design and not just of the ceramic itself, but also the internal aspect of the bezel, we're able to achieve a high impact resistance, to Grand Seiko standards, in order to make this possible. Let's say
9RA5.
Yes.
5-day power reserve. Tighter range of accuracy than conventional spring drive as well.
Correct, yeah. So we have temperature compensation incorporated into the IC, which also houses the quartz oscillator. So that's a totally new development by the manufacturer. So this is in-house developed IC, we call it package IC, and it allows for even tighter spec. Instead of plus or minus 1 second per day, it's plus or minus half a second per day, which is pretty amazing. On top of that, compared to our other spring drive divers, smaller in width and also in thickness. So 2 days extra power reserve, higher accuracy, and in a smaller package.
Titanium case,
Yes.
bracelet, 4 points of micro adjustment in that clasp.
Yep, and the ratcheting expansion to go over the wetsuit because, you know, everyone that wears a dive watch must be going diving, right?
That's true, yeah, everybody does that, right? 100%. Want to move on to tray number 2.
All right, so tray number 2. This is certainly a star of the show. The saddest aspect of this watch, though, is I hate to show it to people because we're only making 100 pieces.
I saw that on the case back and I got sad.
Yeah, it brought a lot of tears to eyes this time. But so our very famous Shunbun dial we're incorporating into our thin dress design. For this watch, you know, the dial is basically the same as you would find on the SBGY026. A couple differences. One, there's no power reserve on the dial, so that makes it different. No date. So that also makes it different. But because of the thin profile and the very dramatically curved sapphire crystal and very tight spec tolerances, because we want to make it as thin as possible, we have to curve the dial as well. So the dial is curved, which is an additional step in, you know, after the press patterning process. And then on top of that, we also have to curve the hands of the minutes and seconds, so that it follows the contour of the inside of the crystal, because it's dual curve crystal. You need to make sure it's perfect spec. So that's actually done by craftsmen and women in the studio. That's not done through the manufacturing process or in you know, by machine, let's say. So that's all handwork right there.
Total thickness of this watch, roughly?
Is 10.2.
10.2.
So that includes the sapphire, which is close to about 2 millimeters tall.
Yeah, it's quite dome.
Yeah, it wears very flat. So it'll be 18 karat rose gold with the silvery pink dial, but I will say that the rose definitely makes it err on the pink side a little bit more than you would find on the titanium model.
It's wonderful.
Yeah.
Now the last two. So I think there are expressions of two different sides of Grand Seiko. One is your case finishing. The other is then shifting into a new chronograph. But let's start with the Majestic White Birch.
So, you know, I love white birch a lot. I know you do too. Yeah.
A lot of white birch.
Yeah, it's, birch is something special. So, you know, we have 2 different versions of white birch in Evolution 9 design. Right, we have the High Beat 36,000, which you're very probably wearing a lot, I'm noticing lately.
Yes, I
And
am.
thank you for that. You know, it makes me feel good about when I wear mine. And then there's also a spring drive version. And so the spring drive version is made, you know, totally separate, right? We have our 2 studios, Shinshu Watch Studio and Shizuku Ishii up north. And the Shinshu Watch Studio, as I mentioned before, central Japan, you know, 2 totally different manufacturers, 2 totally different philosophies, let's say. And their expression of white birch is very different. You know, a little bit more silver on the high beat and a little bit more of a rugged pattern.
Yes.
Where spring drive, kind of like the movement itself, right? It's a little more smooth, a little more curvy. And this pattern is utilized on this new Majestic White Birch. So the pattern itself is applied by press, similar to the actual model of the spring drive 5-day. However, it's got to be curved because of the thin profile of the case again, so similar to the one we just talked about. But if you look very closely at the dial itself, you'll notice nothing's printed. Everything's carved into the dial. So even if you look at the 6 o'clock, the little Japan 9R020880, yeah, that's all carved in.
The little star indication, the GS, Grand Seiko, yes.
So very meticulously carved into the dial and very refined. You know,
is that even the minute track too? The minute track.
Minute track also, yeah. So that little star at the 6 o'clock indicates that, and typically in Grand Seiko, it indicates that the hour markers are made of precious metal. So in this instance, we're utilizing 14 karat white gold, and you know, 14 karat gives us the ability to, you know, manipulate so we can work with the diamond cutting process a little bit better. So it's more, you know, flat, and most importantly, has the very sharp facets that are, you know, pronounced throughout our brand. Otherwise, very difficult with gold. The other interesting thing too on this model, and anything using our 9R02 movement, is the hands are actually made of 14 karat gold as well. It's uncommon for Grand Seiko to do that because when you know, we won't change the design of our hands, right? They got to be broad, they got to be wide, and they got to be very heavily faceted. So if you go from a material like brass to gold, the weight's going to change, and that could affect the performance of the movement. You know, it's going to have maybe some effect on the power reserve or just operation overall, let's say. So you can't just change the material. You have to, you know, consider these things, right? Performance is everything to Grand Seiko. So 9R02, that's the way you're getting gold hands. So with this, also, I'm sure you've noticed the pattern on the case.
I'd love to know more about the case.
Yeah. So this is Platinum 950. You're looking at, this is non-functioning prototypes, I hate to say, but the final product will be in Platinum 950. This one's not. But
I can feel the weight.
Yeah, you can feel it. And also the luster will be a bit different. Mm-hmm. So, I don't want to, make it seem as if this is, going to be how it looks on your wrist when the lucky 50 people in the world that are getting one are actually acquiring them. Mm-hmm. But the carving is going to be the same process. And, our goal, as I mentioned with the dials, is to make everything consistent. But this case is hand-carved. I can assure you that our goal is to replicate it the same every time. Practice makes perfect, right? So the craftsman that's engraving these cases is using a little rotary tool to create these deep and wide grooves that are reminiscent of the white birch forest, which is inspired by this beautiful area in central Japan at the base of the Yatsugatake mountain, this beautiful area called Yachiho Plateau. And so these white birch trees in the wintertime serve as the inspiration for this majestic white birch model. So this is our pinnacle birch, basically.
No, it's beautiful, and I'm just thinking about to hand carve this with platinum, the amount of pressure to be having to do that. Because I would imagine, to keep that consistency through all of these different models, that's going to be a challenge. But
certainly,
yeah, it's
like I said, practice makes perfect. So a couple of other things about the case, because it's Platinum 950. We cold forge all of our precious metal models, so they compress it, anneal it, compress it, anneal it, and they do that many times over to make it Zaratsu polishable, let's say. Then they Zaratsu polish the case, and then they do the carving. So you have to have the very delicate touch so that you can retain some of that perfect polish. Otherwise, it's not a Grand Seiko. But yeah, this is this is kind of the pride and joy, I'd say, of our micro artist studio, because the way that they make these is just so unique and such a, it's still, of course, an expression of nature, right? The nature of time is Grand Seiko's brand philosophy, and is very much in the spirit of the brand, and even Japan in general. But it's really the movement that drives people crazy. So this may look very similar to a very popular brand that's not sold anywhere outside of Japan, called Credor. And if you know someone, every once in a while you'll be able to find them outside of Japan, but it's a rare instance, let's say. So Credor has become synonymous with hot horology and high finishing, right? So the same team in the micro artist studio that's responsible for these Credor, most importantly the H2, the one porcelain dial, hand painted. Yeah, I think everyone knows that one. So this is the same team. Instead of painting the dial, it's carved. It's the differences between the two brands, right? Grand Seiko's got to be a little more practical, and porcelain for the dial is maybe not a practical material for Grand Seiko. But we wanted to outdo ourselves in the movement finishing. Not just the movement finishing, actually, but the practicality of it. So this, compared to the H2, H2 has a 60-hour power reserve. And theoretically, it should be only 48 hours on the HE. But we utilize this system called the torque return system. And basically, while the torque is high, it sends the excess energy that would be typically lost in transmission back to the barrel to kind of rewind itself. So we utilize this on this 9R02 caliber. And it will basically recycle the energy for the first 48 hours.
How is it cycling that energy back? What is it, an additional gear train
back? An additional gear train, and then after about 48 hours, it disengages and lets it deplete the rest of the power reserve. Once the torque is, too weak, let's say, to drive it. So this is, brilliance in a relatively simple construction. On top of that, this uses our dual spring barrel. So 2 springs, 1 barrel, and they work together to drive long duration and high torque, because you need high torque with spring drive, and I know you know that from your spring drive video, which I hear about all the time. People love it, so thank you again for that. Of course. The difference between the H2 and this, the H2 60 hours, this is 84 hours. You get a full extra day compared to the H2.
Very impressive.
Yeah, and it's smaller. So the case is 38.5 millimeters. It's 9.8 millimeters thick, and the H is 10.3 in terms of thickness, and then 39 millimeters wide. So, yeah, smaller all the way around.
Thank you for going into the detail of the movement, too, because I think most people, when they look at this, they see this, and even for myself, first glance, because I'm still digesting a lot of the watches at the show, and see this, of course, you're going to see the case, you're going to see the dial. But I think it's important to make that distinction about the movement and how it works.
I want you to see two very important elements that make the finishing higher level than the H.
Please.
So in between these two jewels, they're called diaphix, right? They're lubricant retention jewels. There's this beautiful inward angle. And if you look at the seam at the very, perfect meeting point between those two curves, that takes a lot of work. And it is a near perfect seam. And that is completely crafted by hand. So H2 does not have that. And that's a very, difficult thing. A lot of people look for the, really sharp inward angles, and they're hard to find in watchmaking. There's a few brands that do it great, and the Micro Artist Studio I think they're working very hard to make it as perfect as they possibly can. The other thing is the dual spring barrel, because it's above the bridge. H2 doesn't have that, right?
You can see it's stepped.
It's flush, and it's convex beveling on the edge of the barrel as well, so you have an additional step you wouldn't find in the H2. So this one, limited to 50 pieces, also has a gold plaque. And this may add a few months to the production time, but the client can have the about 10 characters roughly of their choice engraved onto that gold plaque. So it says Micro Artist here, but dealer's choice, right? If you're buying it, you can get almost whatever you want as long as it's within 10 characters. And it'll be hand carved into that plaque.
And finally,
yes. So as amazing as this is, and very high price at $79,000, but when you look at all you get with it, it's very reasonable, in many different ways, but in a very different price segment.
And you could argue that this is the most important watch for Grand Seiko at this show in terms of what it means from a mechanical standpoint. We saw the work you've done with the 9SA5 and developing that whole infrastructure, and now seeing this come forward is, I think, very important for you all.
I couldn't have said it any better, but yes, this is truly important, and from an engineering standpoint, let's say, seemingly impossible for us for many years. So we first introduced a chronograph to Grand Seiko very late in the game compared to many, in 2007 with our spring drive chronograph, the 9R86. Fortunately for us, for Grand Seiko, we have the backlog of Seiko's history to look at in terms of creating, new timepieces. And Seiko introduced their first automatic chronograph, and it was the first in the world with a vertical clutch and column wheel in 1969. So we have all that history and all this watchmaking know-how that we've acquired and that we can use for Grand Seiko to create, as an example, the spring drive chronograph. But after we came out with the spring drive, everyone wanted a mechanical chronograph. And that's a little bit more challenging. When you start a stopwatch in a chronograph, it draws power. The benefit of spring drive is there's no balance wheel, so you don't have to worry about the amplitude, right? The degree of the swing. So, because the amplitude will typically drop, which means a drop in performance and accuracy.
With that sudden transfer of energy now driving it.
Yeah, you're losing power, and it's not as effective, let's say. So that was one of the main reasons why we couldn't do it. So many years have passed, and really the biggest breakthrough that allowed us to be able to achieve a mechanical chronograph was the development of 9SA5. So, and in particular, the dual impulse escapement. So
just from an efficiency standpoint, that was just such a breakthrough, right?
Oh yeah. So if you look at our 9S86 or 85 as an example, our high beat, that's kind of the mainstay in the lineup. We have a very energy efficient escapement made by MEMS. Compared to a conventional escapement, very high efficiency. It's made in a skeletonized form in order to reduce weight and improve the efficiency of the transfer of energy. On top of that, it's more smooth than a conventionally manufactured part because of the manufacturing technique. There's less friction resistance, right? There's a much smoother surface. On top of that, we also have lubricant retention in each individual tooth. There's a little pocket, let's say, a little step that retains the lubricant. So all these great benefits. So it's very efficient compared to a conventional lever escapement. But when we introduced the 9SA5 dual impulse escapement, we improved the efficiency 20% approximately compared to 9S8 series as an example. So huge savings in power consumption, right? The dual impulse does a lot, and when we announced 9SA5 in 2020, we gave you a little teaser. And not a lot of people realize this. You know, we said 9SA5 is, you know, basically the foundation of the future of Grand Seiko, right? It's, you know, how we're going to be looking at mechanical movements moving forward. And by saying it was the foundation of a new future that Grand Seiko is going to be built upon, right, we were hinting, right, that we can do things like this. So.
And how this all kind of culminates is you have a power reserve, so you still have, that is extended beyond what you would typically see for a chronograph. You said, is it 70 plus hours for?
72 hours with use of the chronograph. So.
And a high beat.
Yes, and it's 36,000. So just to give you the, I'm sure everyone's curious as to why it's called Tentagraph.
Oh, please enlighten us.
I have to, right? So 10 comes from 10 beat.
Of course.
The T comes from 3 day. The A comes from automatic, and then graph obviously comes from chronograph. So 10 beat, 3 day automatic chronograph, which you know, by our research is the longest duration of a 10 beat watch on the market today, right? So,
and what you also did is I noticed, and we were talking about this before rolling, is you shifted the chronograph functions to the dial side of the movement, right? So you stacked it on that side.
Yeah. So, and I know a lot of people may, you know, immediately think like this is based on 9SA5, so it's modular, and you know, modular is, you know, I don't want to say it's always frowned upon, but you know, it's typically not best for performance. Let's say, like integrated is typically better. So, as an example, spring drive integrated chronograph. Modular, typically there's a greater loss of amplitude and in turn accuracy when you activate the chronograph. It's just the way it is, right? So because of the dual impulse escapement, not only do we reduce compared to other modular chronographs, we actually improve compared to most integrated. So the loss is minimal, right? Even compared to integrated. So this is one of the reasons why we were able to do this, and we're doing it on modular. So really, really, you know, important, that dual impulse escapement.
Does adding the chronograph functions, did that add anything to the width of the movement at all and dimensionality?
In terms of the width, no. Obviously the height.
Yeah, verticality is going to change.
Yeah, of course, and that's the other kind of downside, let's say, of using modular. But what's great about this is 9SA5 is, you know, the slimmest automatic high beat that we have, and overall dimensions are actually thinner than our spring drive chronograph.
Ceramic bezel?
Ceramic bezel.
New blue dial color with very interesting finish.
Yeah, so this is our Mount Iwate, our ridges of Mount Iwate pattern. And so if you were, let's say, in a helicopter above Mount Iwate looking down, you'd see these beautiful ridges spreading throughout the mountain, and this serves as the influence for the design. It's been in our lineup for a long time, longer than it's been sold in the US market as an example. But this color has only been used for boutique exclusive models in the past. This is the first time it's going into a more widely available model, let's say, available at Grand Seiko salons and boutiques.
And then full case dimensions, if you could.
So this is going to be 43.2 in terms of the width, which is actually smaller than the spring drive chronograph. Just over 15 in overall height, which is also thinner than the spring drive chronograph. So overall, smaller, right? Hard to do. And just as many components, approximately 400 components in the movement, and actually higher jewel count than the spring drive, which is hard to believe because I had 50 jewels. This is 60. So the you know, the other thing too, in terms of the height, there's a box-shaped sapphire crystal on this, so that's about 1 millimeter approximately of the height. And you know, there's really a lot going on with this watch. But in terms of the design, you know, this is our Evolution 9 collection. You learned about the Sports Evolution 9 last year, so I don't have to say too much, but I will point out that, you know, focus on comfort, right? It retains Grand Seiko style, right? Flat surfaces, sharp edges, all these beautiful intersecting planes, but really a huge focus on comfort. So 23 millimeter wide bracelet, which is thick, and the case has a very low center of gravity, so it feels very stable and comfortable on the wrist. Of course, the high-intensity titanium helps with that as well.
2-button release clasp, 4 points of micro adjustment as well.
Indeed, indeed. So you'll also notice compared to the spring drive, at least the core models, the pushers are a lot smaller. So those have a locking mechanism where this, you know, the locking mechanism is good for security and, you know, so there's no false start or stop. But in this instance, we wanted to increase the operability, and we were able to reduce the pusher size tremendously. So that's because of the lack of the locking mechanism. But I think a lot of people will like that. I like the large pushers on the spring drive, but it's not for everyone.
Yeah, and then also when you're dealing with just the visual presence, making it seem a little bit more compact in terms of the dimension set, I think that will also help people. But Joe, thank you very much for this education lesson as always.
Totally my pleasure. Last year we did the Kodo. It was such a great introduction, and obviously a huge breakthrough in terms of watchmaking, and very exciting. But it was a very high price tag, right? It's $350,000, very reasonable for what it is, of course. But this year I'm glad we brought it back to kind of the roots of Grand Seiko, and this I will say, out of all the chronographs that both Seiko and Grand Seiko have made throughout the years, this is one of the biggest breakthroughs that we've ever had, and it's a very exciting time. So we're looking forward to getting this in stores in June. So, Teddy.
As always, Joe.
Thank you very much.
Always a pleasure.
All right, appreciate
Everybody,
it.
thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you all next time.
Take care.